Hey everyone, this is Sean Moran from Entrepreneur Insights, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dan Woerheide, who is a coach and has a couple other things going on that you'll hear about and learn about, which is pretty exciting. Definitely a really cool and unique guy. On this channel, we do interviews with entrepreneurs as well as share ideas with you on entrepreneurship. So with that, we'll introduce our guest, Dan. Dan, how you doing tonight?
Sean, man, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a long day, but I'm here and I'm doing well.
Fantastic. Well, Dan and I did have the pleasure of meeting back maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, and definitely was a great conversation. We met. Definitely an awesome individual, former member of our military, so I always appreciate that. So wanted to have you, Dan, tell us a little about your business and tell us a little bit about about yourself. Quick background for the audience.
Yeah, well, the business is evolving, but I'm a marketing coach. I teach people, well, I work with people to develop narratives for their business and then how to work with them to understand how to translate that narrative into their marketing collateral. So whether it's their website, a sales letter, or email campaign, something along those lines. And I use the elements of story. So I'm a Storybrand Certified guide, and that really is providing a framework that I use as part of that process. And then there's some methodologies behind it. But that's the gist of my primary focus in business, is helping people speak and communicate clearly about their purpose in their customers' lives. And I'm
outstanding. I'm sorry.
Got to talking about that, and I didn't hit your second question, but
oh, that's fine. No, absolutely. That's that's really interesting. And so, how did you get involved in that? And how do you see that, as you say, evolving and developing?
Yeah. So, well, as you mentioned, I was in the Army. I spent 16 years. I retired a little bit early due to some back issues. So I medically retired from the Army at 16 years. I spent those years as an intelligence analyst in a very specific subset of intel. And I found along the way, I had been an instructor for the Army introductory course, or where we learn, it's AIT, Advanced Individual Training. It's where these young analysts learn the skill of analysis. I enjoyed the instruction component quite a bit, but what I found through the years is that I didn't quite enjoy the work I was doing, and the more I got away from it, the less interest I had in it. As you grow in the Army, you move into more leadership roles, or you stay technical, and there's a couple other things to do. But I found I enjoyed the leadership role. I became a victim advocate back in 2007, and the leadership and the mentorship, and then being able to simply empower people to take their lives back in situations that could have been really bad. I found just a passion for contributing to that atmosphere and helping others. That's kind of what led me here. In 2011, I became Ramsey Solutions Master Financial Coach. And one of the things, as I started approaching the end of my career in the Army anyway, I started thinking about how to develop a plan for when I got out. They're always talking to us about having a solid plan. What are you going to do? Are you thinking about your resume, college, things along those lines? And I was thinking I wanted to go into business. Prior to joining the Army, I joined at 26 years old. And I'm going to try and keep this short, Sean, but we'll get through it. 26 years old.
That's all right. It's an interesting story so far.
At 26 years old, I joined the Army. And before that, I found that I'd just been searching. I don't know what I was searching for, but I kept doing different jobs. I have a wealth of experience in a variety of fields. I was an industrial pump mechanic. I painted race cars. I mean, I ran a warehouse for an electrical company. I learned quite a bit about a lot of things, and I just never found that one thing that felt right or felt good. So I was just constantly searching. That's kind of one of the reasons that led me to the Army. And then fast forward back to the Ramsey Solutions financial coaching piece, I started leaning into that a little bit more and looking at how I might be able to develop that as a small business, at least while I was still active duty and getting started to learn a little bit about business. And what I found I was struggling with was how to connect with new clients, how to market myself as a business, and started playing with, some copywriting skills, started messing around with different platforms, learning how to communicate in an online environment, and then learning how to be able to talk about my business better when I was out networking. Although there's one challenge, and I think we'll get to that in a few minutes, but one challenge was networking while you're still active duty. And Sean, you're a pretty busy guy. You probably have a similar experience, although you're out and about. It's hard. You get limited time to do those things. If you have a family as well, it makes it challenging. So what little networking I was doing was not as effective as it could have been. And then in 2015, I was introduced to Storybrand through the Ramsey Solutions community. We were introduced to the framework, and it really just made sense. And I started dabbling with it a little bit, if you will, and learning how to speak better about the purpose of my business at the time. And I really liked what they were doing. I really liked how it made sense from a story perspective. And I felt much more confident in what I was communicating. And the next progression was realization that as a financial coach, you have to kind of do a lot of things to make enough money to sustain yourself. And it was either meet with a whole lot of clients every week, or find something else that I could do. I could make a little bit more doing it. I still have the same amount of work going on, but I don't have to meet with as many different individual clients throughout the week. And that's when Storybrand came in, and I've been working to grow that ever since. That was, so I left the Army in April of last year, and that's really when I started moving full-time into my business. And so, at a year old, still a relatively new, relatively young business, and there's still a lot of things I need to learn, but I'm enjoying every step of the way.
That's excellent. No, and I agree. I think, being an entrepreneur for about 5 years, I could say the same. You just keep on learning. There's always new things to learn and cover, and the important part is that you're working to give back, and I can obviously hear the passion in your voice. So, what's the best advice anyone's given you so far?
Man, that's a good question. I've received a lot of great advice from a lot of different communities, a lot of different leaders. I think one thing, and you just hit on it, that I'll throw out there, I just heard it again the other day, is, you used to hear this phrase, people probably still hear it today, is that leaders are readers. And I love to read, but I heard a little different version the other day. I think is probably one of the best pieces that stands out at the moment, and that's that leaders aren't just readers, leaders are learners. And so I'm constantly pursuing that mindset, learning as much as I can about everything I can, realization that I need to have a little bit of focus. I can't, get off track too far, because I'll get distracted and I'll start learning about something that doesn't apply to what I need to know today. And so refining that is tough, but I love to learn about new stuff. And then another one that stands out that just came to mind was kind of along the same path. I'll come back to it because it just left me again, Sean.
Hey, that's okay. So yeah, I think what you're saying there is kind of more along the lines of niche, right? Well, obviously leaders are readers. I agree. You're constantly learning. To me, it's also, talking to other people in the same industry and other industries to say, well, how do you do this? Or how do you do that? And just, kind of learning from other people and then sharing your ideas too. So I think that's something that I do all the time. What have you found as, like, some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced so far?
Well, I'll tell you what, niche is a great point, and probably one of the biggest challenges I've experienced. So if you were to go to my website right now, you'll see some of that still reflected, but I'm in the middle of a redesign. There's going to be a whole new look coming out in the next week or so, with a little bit more clarity in my message. So starting out, it was hard for me to determine who I really felt like I wanted to work with. And It took some time. As a matter of fact, January of this year, about mid-January, you know, the beginning of January, people start throwing out goals for the year and New Year's resolutions. Well, this year is not the first year I've seen it, but it's the first year that the word of the year stood out to me. And I didn't think much of it at first. I was just like, okay. But it stood out. And then I did an interview with a CEO of, I did an interview with CEO through another organization I'm part of, which is Startup Grind. And we can talk about that. But after that interview, he came back to me and said, Dan, he said, first of all, I was very humbled by his words, but he told me that had been one of the best experiences he'd had as far as being interviewed. I was able to set the scene for him to be comfortable and confident in sharing his story throughout his business career and even some of his personal stuff with confidence and most importantly, authentically. He felt very comfortable just sharing those. It felt like a natural conversation. So that was humbling for me. But what stood out to me was the ability to create that environment with that authenticity component. And so that word stuck out to me, and I chose that word as my word of the year. So I sat down and said, okay, I still haven't gotten this whole business thing figured out. You know, there's no one right way to do it. There's no finite solution. We just develop and evolve as we go. But I sat down and went through Simon Sinek's Why Discovery course online with another good friend of mine, because there's some individual exercises in there, but then there's a partner exercise in there, and they help you develop the themes from the stories throughout your life. And so I shared some of those stories with him, and we identified a few themes. And what came out of it is that my why is really to foster relationships and empower others so they can become the most authentic version of themselves, and to build strong and strengthen communities. And that led me to listen, as we were going through that work, it led me to the work I've done specifically to empower women, and the fact that I was brought up by a single mother and I watched her struggle day in and day out. And I wished someone had been there basically to be an advocate for her, or to be a guide for her to be more successful and to be, you know, fulfill whatever was there for her to fulfill. Because I don't feel like watching her struggle, she was achieving that, right? So women in business is who I want to help. And then as a veteran, I know the struggles in our veteran community that we face just in transitioning, but then in entrepreneurship, there's some significant challenges there, you know, learning how to do a business, because you learn a lot about leadership in the military, but sometimes there's some things missing on the business side. And so those are the two people I want to work with primarily. And so the number one challenge was identifying that. It took me a long time to really clarify who I wanted to work with and be able to talk to them specifically. And I think that's very important in business. If you're talking to everyone, then you end up talking to no one.
I agree, and I'm kind of the same. It took me a while too, because I'm the type that's like, yeah, I want to help everybody. I know a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of this, but then you're chasing rabbits everywhere, and you end up not accomplishing anything, just like you said. So yeah, you mentioned Startup Grind, and I know you and I had a conversation around that before, and I think that's really cool that that's something that you've gotten into, and you know, are able to be the leader of that. So share a little bit about with the audience on that, what it means from, you know, locally here in Northern Virginia, and what it means nationally, so that people that are interested can, you know, either come to your chapter or other ones too. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start by saying, you know, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I am the director for Startup Grind Prince William County, and I'm the co-director for Startup Grind Fairfax County. And we meet once a month. It's a networking event designed for entrepreneurs, startups, or business owners, people who want to connect with them and provide resources to that community. Really, it's about strengthening the business community in our local economic or ecosystems, if you will. But more importantly, Startup Grind itself. Startup Grind itself is a global community of entrepreneurs. Our global sponsor is Google for Startups. They they provide a wealth of resources for us. And globally, we meet once a year for a global conference in San Francisco. Just came back from there in February. It was a really good time. I bring that up and I talk about the fact that they're global is because plugging into a local system is probably the best thing that business owners can do if they're looking for a way to network and a way to reach out to other resources, because each of these chapter directors has that global community of leaders at their fingertips from all walks of life. We've got people as directors who wanted to get into entrepreneurship and never had learned anything about it. So they jump in and they start learning everything they can, and they're helping other businesses, and they're running their own startups now. We've got people who have, had multiple successful exits from large startups or organizations. We've got a wealth of resources at our fingertips. They're a phone call or an email away. And I think that's super helpful for the business community at large. Our values are important. It's to give first, help others, and make friends. And so unlike most networking events, it's not self-centered whatsoever. We're there with the sole focus of trying to build community and help others.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So within the concept, and I'll link in the notes below of the video, all the ways to get in touch with you and the information that we talk about, startup grind and all that, so that people can go back and reference that as well. One of the things I wanted to ask is, like as far as your success in your business, what would you tell someone that's, kind of starting out, and just like you, myself, I became an entrepreneur at 40. So again, like a little bit later in our lives, we're doing that, whereas some people younger are starting out. So what would you tell anybody? What would be the best advice for what you've learned so far? Hey, do this or don't do this because it'll save you time or help you.
Well, I've got a couple tips, if that's all right. So the first one is something I heard from Gary Vaynerchuk a while back, and it's, get out there and do it. If it doesn't work right the first time, you can go back and refine it. There's always a job. You can always go get a job. If entrepreneurship is calling you, just get out and do it. So that takes me to the second point. I think they tie together well, is I see people struggle all the time with, having to have this refined plan. Everything's got to be just so before they start. And I would say you have to have three things. I tell people this all the time. You have to have three things to have a business. You have to have a product or service. You have to have the ability to deliver that product or service, and you have to have the ability to take payment. And for those people that question payment methods, I take cash. So if you have those three things, then you can really go out and start refining the rest of it as you go, and building on it. You don't have to have a website. Sure, it's nice, and sure, everybody wants to have one. But the truth of the matter is, unless your business is dependent on having a website, you don't have to have one. So you really should get out there and just start practicing and going at it and getting after it. Grinding, stealing from the startup grind community. Grinding it out and figuring it out as you go. The other tip that I'd leave is that I urge anybody, especially if you're just getting started out, get really clear on what it is that you're offering and how people can get access to it. If you can speak about those things in finite methods, with as few words as possible, then they'll be able to understand what it is that you're offering very easily. It's like the difference between, what's off the top of my head. So, saying we build websites that work versus, aesthetically pleasing design. What? So,
right.
I want a website that works, so I'm going to go with that guy.
Yeah, I like that because, and you said, talk about message being clear. I worked at Robert Half before, and so a lot of times I'd be looking up companies and trying to find out, more about what they do. And you go down most websites and it says, we deliver blah, 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 blah. And at the end you say, well, what is it that they really do? And you have no idea. You can read their whole website. It's like, our mission statement is to be the best possible company that ever helped our clients. Okay, help them do what? It's just like you say, get to the point. Tell us what you do so we can understand
Yeah.
it.
Especially in today's age, you've got about 3 seconds to capture their attention. And if they can't understand it, you're causing them to burn too many calories in their brain, and they shut down. They go on to the next guy that can make it very clear, because obviously it's not exactly what I'm looking for if I can't figure it out there.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing you said is about getting it started right away. Just get started and get out there. I always called it you version 1.0. And if you think about, whether it's that Apple iPhones or Google, being a Verizon guy, I use as examples. You look where it is today versus where it was. If they waited till they refined how perfect the camera was, or how perfect this was, or how fast this was, or whether there was bugs in the software, it would be years and years before anything would ever come out. It's, create it with bugs and then fix it, and just keep on getting better and better and better, right? And obviously we want to give the best to our clients, but also getting it out there. And so I think that's a great point. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think it's absolute. It's huge. So, and that's the number one thing. Well, it's not the number one thing, but it's one of the big things that I hear people talking about when they're talking about a business idea, or they're talking about going into business. I have this great idea and I'm going to do this. I just need this first. And so that's the other piece of advice that I was going to answer to your question earlier. I'll come back to you now. So having a growth mindset versus a limiting belief mindset, I think, is important. It's easy for me to say that I'm not a great designer, and I'm not. But if I allow that to define who I am and leave it at I'll never be a great designer, then I will never be a great designer. I could turn that into a growth mindset and say, I'm going to learn as much as I can about design. I might never be great, but at least I can continue to work towards being better.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. What would you say, what's good about being your own boss and what's bad about being your own boss?
I'd probably say that the things that are good are also the things that are bad. So it's real easy to sit here and say that it's great to not have to be a number in an organization. But at the same time, that means that I have to rely on building my own accountability into that picture, and building systems to where I am held accountable on my own. So for the same freedom that I get, it's still limiting, if that makes sense. Being able to spend time with my daughter. I'm a single father, and I spend a lot of time away from my family, which is why I'm a single father, or partially why. I'm not blaming my family or the military. I spent more time focused on my military family than my own family, and that was my own fault. But I digress. So spending time with my daughter is huge. Since that whole transition took place, and I've gotten out in the Army, I'm able to go watch her cheer at her games at school, and take her to events that I just hadn't had the opportunity to be a part of before. And so that flexibility, I think, is a huge, huge win from the entrepreneur side. As long as I'm still accountable and I build it in appropriately, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that, because sometimes it's I don't really feel like working today, and nobody's going to force you to. But then when you want money to come in and you haven't been doing that, then that's the concern. Or I want to get this level or this far, for this particular month, or this is how many people I need to see, and each day or each hour you let go by is missed opportunity. So definitely
Absolutely.
get that for sure. How do you assess your progress, towards your goal, whether it's, monthly, annually, or just long-term goal? How do you assess your progress towards your goals?
Can you see that? I'm going to advertise for somebody right now. No,
Okay.
well, I don't know if you can see that or not. It's the full focus planner from Michael Hyatt. And what I really like about this thing is right up front, it's got my goals, my annual goals, and I can break them down to which goals I'm going to focus on for the quarter. You need to write that down. Full focus planner from Michael.
Yeah, I was going to write that one down.
And then it allows me to break down my goals in further detail. So I can outline, following the steps for making SMART goals. It allows you to break them down so you can, it's one thing to write a goal down, because a goal that's not written is really just a dream. When you write it down, becomes a goal, or something that's at least more tangible. But then when you take the time to break it down into actionable steps, following the SMART goal setting steps or some variation of that, it really starts letting that goal come to life, and you can see how you can work towards achieving it. But then each month and each week is broken down to where there's simple steps incorporated that really align with, ideally, your overall goal for the quarter. So these planners are broken down to quarters. I get a new one each quarter, and I sit down each morning. I review my goals, and then I start building my weekly plan if it's the beginning of the week, or I start building my daily plan, throughout the week. And there's top 3 priorities during the day for each day of the week. Ideally, something in there is aligned towards working towards a goal that's on your list. So if I had a goal of starting or learning how to start and then starting a podcast, for instance, then I could define what those action steps looked like and say I wanted to do it before the end of the quarter, since we're starting a new quarter. Then I can start building out a plan over the next couple months to move through each phase of that goal process, and hopefully be closer to achieving it at the end of the quarter.
That's great. No, and that's one thing I love is SMART goals as well, is, just kind of, breaking it down specifically. And I agree. One of the things, I don't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but I remember when I was going for my coaching certification, one of the things they said was that, like you said, if you just want to do something, it'll never happen. If you write it down, the percentage is so much higher that it increases. And the other thing is, if you share it with somebody, and somebody that's like an accountability partner. So if I just write it down too, I increase my percentage, I think something like 50% compared to just having it in my mind. And then if I share that with somebody else, because then they can come back and say, hey, Sean, did you accomplish this or that? Or where are you in that? And it's like, oh yeah, I got to do that. So I think that's super helpful as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Accountability.
So
I think
that's awesome
huge.
to have that.
And then, so mentors play a huge part in accountability as well. And so being able to find the right mentors and share your goals with them, or even work on refining your goals with them. I do some mentorship for another organization for veterans. And that's one of the things we talk about often is goal setting. And then I go back and help them refine those goals to meet those components of SMART goals, which, since we talked about it, I want to make sure everybody knows what they are. But it's specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. And if you look it up, there might be some variations of what they actually spell out to or break out to, but you'll get the gist of it, and there'll be plenty of resources for free to help you guide you through what that looks like.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for defining that. I was thinking that in my head, so I'm glad you said that. I know every entrepreneur has this. So what failures might you had, or what has failures taught you and helped you towards success?
Well, failures have taught me, change what's the word? Not change. They taught me to get up and keep going. And that if I were to just accept failure as the end state, I wouldn't be here talking to you today about the good things that I've experienced, the fun I've had and being along the way. It wouldn't be any fun. I'd just be beating myself up. And so that goes back to that mindset shift, going from the limiting beliefs to the the words escape me again. But
that's a little bit later at night. It's probably been a long day. So I know the feeling in that regard. Yeah.
Well, and that's time. So this is one of the flexible things we were talking about a minute ago. The ability to stay up here and do this with you is super fun. So that's one of the perks, is that I don't have to worry about, getting up at 4 a.m. and driving into Fort Belvoir or wherever it is that I happen to be. But so I get some flexibility there. So now I'll just get up an hour later in the morning and it'll be great. But the growth mindset, that's the word I was looking for. So that failures have taught me to adapt that growth mindset and know that a failure is really just a way to learn how to do things better.
Mm-hmm. I don't
That's
remember who said it, but someone said, I'm trying to remember who it was. Someone said, I think it was Edison or something like that. And they said, well, why'd you keep going when you failed so many times? He said, I didn't fail. I just learned what didn't work.
That's right. Yeah, that's why I was getting ready to use that example. That's perfect. I don't remember who I heard it from either, but I heard it recently. I was like, man, that's huge, because it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to learn from those things that just didn't work well. And the fact that I'm still here talking to you today means I didn't fail at anything.
Mm-hmm. Right. You just learn what
Learn
didn't
what
work and learn
learn
how to
what I
make it
should
work.
be doing.
So who would be the ideal client for you to work with, and why? What would be, if a person watching this would say, oh great, like what would it be that you would say to them, so they'd say, yeah, I want to work with Dan, or I need to be in touch with him. What who would be the best person that's going to benefit most from a working relationship with you?
Well, so I'll lean back on the women and veterans in business. Anybody that's feels like they're struggling to have their business or themselves be seen and heard, especially when it comes to maintaining authenticity in that process, because I think people get stuck and they feel like they've got to adapt to the world around them in order to get seen and heard. And I don't believe that that's true. I think that they have a message to share, whether it's their business or their own personal story. And I want to help them get that out there, to help them get it out there with authenticity and still be seen and heard, stand out. So get above that noise, right? We hear the word noise around marketing quite a bit. And I want them to help get them through that noise while maintaining authenticity, and then enjoying what that looks like.
Okay.
So
And
small business.
Okay.
Yeah, small business. And if you look at Virginia, that's, we changed that last year, I think, but that's 250 employees or less. I'm really looking for people that, are entrepreneurs or maybe have a small team and they know they're or they feel like they're struggling to be seen or to be heard. And those are the people I really want to help. Startups are another one I just have an interest and passion for. Again, female or veteran founded. I'll stick with that as my focus. Now, if you call me today and you just say, hey, I want to pick your brain because I heard what you had to say, and I want to know if you can help me, I'm not going to turn you away. But when it comes to speaking about my business and who I want to work with, it's important to have that clarity in order to be able to communicate to the needs that they might be experiencing as individuals.
Good. And so when you say, what particular space do you operate within? Like, so is it social media? Is it speaking in public? Or, what areas will the person benefit from when they work with you?
So I think the number one area that we are able to do or to address. So I guess I'll back up and answer that question. So the Storybrand marketing framework is a 7-part framework based on the elements of story. I kind of touched on that earlier. But then we also have a methodology or a roadmap, if you will, to simplify marketing. So my specialty becomes then communicating your message throughout your website, improving your website first. Then helping you build a plan to on-ramp potential prospects that aren't ready to buy yet to a purchase later, through a downloadable or something similar, some other invitation to engage with you that will allow you to establish some rapport with them if they're not ready to commit to that purchase today. That works especially well for large purchase price points, but it works for all price points. So if you have a $99 product and they like what you're saying, but they're just not sure if that's what they want to spend their money on today, then building that relationship with them is important, because they might in a week's time after hearing some more of what you have to say, be much more interested in buying that product from you. So walking through that component, and that could look a few different ways as well. So that's when you start talking about email marketing. It's when you start talking about potentially social media marketing. It really depends on the business and what makes sense for the business. My focus is getting them through that narrative development and then moving that into communicating that through their marketing collateral. If they want to be a better public speaker, we start with the narrative development, and then we apply that to a keynote development to get them in a better position to market themselves in that keynote. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. No, that's really good. So it's kind of custom to what the person needs,
Absolutely.
but obviously there's steps in the process to get to where you need them to go. So all right, so we've gotten into a lot of information. So I'll just kind of leave you if there's anything that I haven't asked or anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't covered. Just give you the last couple minutes and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it all. I mentioned earlier, excuse me, I'm in the middle of a redesign on my website, so I'll have some things coming up in the near future. But right now, if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller, I'd say reach out to me through my website or my email. You're going to publish my email too, Sean?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Whatever you want, you'll send me those.
Ask me what that looks like. Ideally, I'll sit down and have a conversation with you, or we'll jump on a Zoom call or something, have a conversation, and see if it makes sense. But we'll start with, I'll send you that book, let you learn a little bit about the marketing framework, and then move into maybe either narrative development full on for you and your company, or maybe it makes sense to coach you through some of that process on your own. Those are usually great starting points. So you'll see some more of that. Well, I guess what I was getting at is you'll see some more of that come through as I put the new website in place. There'll be some product offerings that make a little bit of sense from various components of where you want to start.
Excellent.
And yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else that I can think of at this time of night, Sean, but I appreciate that.
Absolutely. No, well, thank you so much for doing this. We'd greatly appreciate it. And as I said in the description section below, I'll put all ways to get in touch with you and the resources that you've mentioned in our interviews. I just want to thank you once again for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Oh man, it's a good time. I'm glad we were able to work it out, and I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.